The day I walked into my own front yard and saw what my sister had done, I actually laughed. Not out of amusement, more like the kind of laugh you let out when something breaks inside you. Spray paint everywhere. Red, black, a slash of neon green. My garage door had thief scrawled in dripping letters, and across the brick facade, she'd tagged the word fraud like I was some criminal mastermind. Funny thing is, I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 3 years. Not since the last time she trashed my place. Back then it was broken glass, slashed cushions, wine on the carpet. She claimed it was an accident. My parents called it a misunderstanding. I called it what it was, jealousy in full bloom. She couldn't handle the idea that I'd pulled myself together while her own life stalled out in neutral. When I finally cut her off, you'd think that would have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Not by a long shot. I live in Sacramento now, ran from a messy divorce in Phoenix, and landed here 5 years ago. Found a rhythm, steady job in tech, modest little house on a quiet street. The kind of place with kids on scooters and neighbors who still wave. I finally felt like I had something stable. So, of course, that's when she reappeared, uninvited and armed with a can of Krylon vengeance. It was a Thursday morning. I was just back from conference in San Diego, suitcase still in the trunk, when I turned the corner and saw the disaster. My stomach knotted, not from fear, from a sick certainty that this wasn't random. In the moment I checked the security footage, there it was. Her car, her smug face under the porch light. The hiss of spray paint filling the audio like a rattlesnake warning. I posted it. The whole clip. Just 15 seconds. No commentary. No hashtags. Just the truth. And oh, did the truth explode. The video went viral within hours. Not millions of views viral, but enough that the local news picked it up. A segment on petty family disputes gone wild, complete with a blurry still of my sister mid-spray. My phone buzzed for days, friends, coworkers, even strangers messaging support or asking for backstory. I didn't answer most of them. What could I say that the footage hadn't already screamed loud enough? But my parents, oh, they called. At first, it was denial. She was going through something. She wasn't herself. This wasn't how she was raised. I listened, jaw clenched, as if I hadn't already spent years watching them twist reality into whatever shape best protected her. Then came a guilt trip. Why would I post it? Why couldn't I handle this privately? Why make a scene? I told them the truth, because the scene wasn't mine. She brought it to my doorstep. Then silence. And then the fallout came. Real consequences, not just social shaming. The cops showed up at her place. She was arrested. Graffiti, vandalism, trespassing, it added up quick. I didn't press charges personally. I didn't have to. The video was evidence enough. The law did what I never could, hold her accountable. When I heard she'd been sentenced, probation, fines, mandatory therapy, I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired, like someone who finally won a game they never asked to play. A week after the sentencing, I got the call I'd been waiting for, but dreading just the same. My parents wanted to clear the air. They invited me to their place in Elk Grove, the same house I grew up in, the same living room where I used to sit cross-legged and hope someone would notice I was hurting. I went. I shouldn't have, but I did. They didn't apologize. That's the part one can't seem to let go of. No apology, no ownership. My dad opened with how this whole thing had been blown out of proportion, like their daughter hadn't just defaced my property on camera. My mom tried the gentle approach, said she was worried about her mental health, that I should have considered how fragile she is before making things public. And there was again, the script, the same one they'd always used. Protect her, blame me, act like I should have been the bigger person because I always had been. They didn't ask if I was okay. Not once. I stood in that room with the faded carpet and the photo of her graduation still hanging over the mantel. And I realized something cold. They didn't want peace. They wanted silence. They wanted me to sweep it all under the rug, pretend we were still the picture-perfect family. But the rug was soaked in years of betrayal. I wasn't about to lift a corner and let the mold breathe. So I told them I was done. Not in anger, not with a dramatic speech. Just a quiet certainty that I'd finally had enough. I left without slamming the door, but the silence that followed, that hit louder than anything. I didn't talk to them after that. Days turned into weeks, then months. At first, I expected some kind of olive branch, a text, an email, even a voicemail. But nothing came. The silence grew roots. It wrapped around everything, from birthdays to holidays, strangling whatever hope was left of reconciliation. And the weirdest part? I didn't miss them. Not really. What I missed was the illusion I used to cling to. The fantasy that family would always come around, that someday they'd see me, really see me, and not just the version of me that made their lives easier. But that fantasy was dead, and I'd been the one who killed it. I threw myself into work. My team at the software firm in downtown Sacramento didn't know what had happened, and I didn't offer it up. I became the guy who always volunteered for extra hours, the one who stayed late to fix bugs no one else wanted to touch. It was easier to debug a broken interface than to unpack why my mother still hadn't called. But at night, when the office lights dimmed and the silence followed me home, I catch myself wondering, did I overreact? Did posting that video make me no better than her? It's a dangerous thing, questioning your own pain. Makes you start sanding down the edges of your memory. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I should have kept it private. Maybe if I just talked to her one more time. But then I'd look at the garage door. The paint had been scrubbed clean, the bricks power washed, but I could still see the shadows of the letters in my mind. Thief. Fraud. No, I didn't overreact. I reacted late. I should have stood up for myself years ago. It was a Tuesday when I saw her again. Not in person. No, I wasn't that unlucky, but on a screen. A mutual friend had tagged her in a photo from some wellness event out in Folsom. There she was, front and center, posing like none of it had ever happened. Like her probation was just a quirky chapter in a self-help memoir she hadn't written yet. She looked unchanged. Same smug tilt to the head, same performative grin. And I felt nothing. Not rage, not resentment, just a quiet, settled kind of distance. Like I'd finally stepped out of the orbit of something toxic. That was the moment I knew I didn't need her apology. Not anymore. I didn't need her to admit anything. Didn't need our parents to rewrite history or beg for my forgiveness. Forgiveness wasn't on the table. Closure didn't come gift-wrapped. It came in small, unremarkable moments like that. Staring at a filtered Instagram post and realizing the person in it couldn't touch me anymore. I made decisions after that. Subtle ones. Changed my number. Moved to a different part of town. I even started therapy, something I'd put off for years because, well, you don't air dirty laundry to strangers, right? Except sometimes that's the only place it gets washed. My therapist, Caleb, early 40s, quietly intense, didn't ask me to fix anything. He just gave me space to call it what it was. Emotional neglect. Repeated. Reinforced. Rewarded, even when I stayed silent. I wasn't silent anymore. There's a strange kind of power that comes from walking away without slamming the door. Not because you're afraid of the noise, but because you know the silence that follows will say everything louder. That's where I found myself, standing in the quiet of my own life, no longer trying to defend my choices to people who'd already decided who I was supposed to be. I stopped explaining myself to anyone. It wasn't defiance. It was survival. I used to narrate my life like a press release, always justifying why I said no, why I didn't show up, why I chose to step back. I'd write long texts to my parents explaining boundaries they never intended to honor. Replay calls in my head, wondering if I'd said too much or not enough. But now I just lived. It started in small ways. I stopped sending holiday cards. Not out of spite, but because they never sent them either, not unless my sister reminded them. I unfollowed both of them on social media. Deleted my mom's number. Left my dad's contact info under a name that meant nothing to me. Property tax reminder. Cold. Maybe. But it kept the resentment from boiling over. I'd rather be distant than bitter. And I began noticing other things too. How light my home felt without the weight of waiting for another betrayal. How the mornings stretched calmly, without an edge of anxiety. I repainted the garage door, not because it needed it, but because it felt like I was reclaiming something. I chose a deep slate blue, the kind of color that looks like midnight just before dawn. Not dramatic, just peaceful. I'd see my neighbors walking their dogs or watering their lawns, and they'd smile, sometimes still a little curious. Some had seen the video. One woman across the street, Denise, mid-60s, part-time florist, all heart, walked over one afternoon and handed me a pie. She said nothing about the footage, just told me she liked the new paint color. I nodded and said thanks. She nodded back like she knew everything anyway. At work, I got promoted. Quietly. No party, no cupcakes, just a new title and an email and a little more breathing room in my paycheck. It felt nice. Not exciting, but earned. I think that's all I ever wanted from my family. Recognition that didn't come with strings. One night, I sat on my porch, the kind of Sacramento evening where the air smells like grass and warm pavement, and I thought about who I'd been before the video. I realized I'd spent most of my life bracing for impact, always anticipating the next slight, the next demand, the next time I'd be asked to be small for someone else's comfort. But now, no one was asking, and I wasn't offering. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not some grand declaration. Not some Instagram quote about cutting toxic people out of your life. Just this, sitting on a porch in a city that finally felt like mine, exhaling without needing to explain why. It didn't take long for the calls to start again. At first, it was just one from my dad. Straight to voicemail. He didn't even leave a message, just his name blinking like a ghost on my call log. A few days later, it was a text from my mom. Hope you're well. Let's talk soon. No puntuación. Like even her keyboard was hesitant. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I knew what was waiting on the other end. The same cycle. Minimize. Deflect. Recenter the conversation around my sister's pain. That was always the loop. Her pain took up all the oxygen in the room, even when she was the one lighting matches. They say when someone shows you who they are, believe them. What they don't say is how hard it is to live with that belief once it's settled in your bones. My cousin, David, probably the only relative who ever truly leveled with me, reached out around that time. Said he saw the video, said it made him sick to watch. We weren't close, but his message came through clean. You did what you had to do. I stared at it for a while before replying with a simple, thanks. It felt like enough. But still, a part of me kept waiting for the backlash. Like I'd spoken out of turn in some unspoken family court. As if by holding someone accountable, I'd betrayed the tribe. That's the thing about dysfunctional families. They run on silence, on emotional bartering. The moment you stop playing, they call you selfish. And yet they kept calling. Eventually, I picked up. It was my mother. Her voice cracked before she even said my name. She asked if I was safe, how I'd been. I gave polite, short answers. She said they missed me. I said I knew. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. She asked if I could maybe help my sister now that she was trying to rebuild. That word, rebuild, like she was the one left in rubble. I felt something shift in me, the way a door shuts when the wind finally pushes hard enough. I told her no, calmly, clearly. No. She got quiet and said something about family being forever, about how no one's perfect. And I told her I wasn't asking for perfect. I was asking for basic decency, respect, accountability. And if that was too high a price, then maybe family wasn't the forever thing she thought it was. She started to cry. I didn't. For once, I didn't fold into her grief like it was mine to carry. I hung up, not in anger, not even with regret, just with the peace of someone who finally understood. Being right comes at a cost, but pretending you're not can bankrupt your soul. After that call, I expected backlash. Maybe another family intervention, maybe a long-winded email from my father dissecting my disrespect. But nothing came, not a single word, just more of that deep, echoing silence I'd come to both resent and respect. It was almost funny how quickly they gave up when I stopped giving. And that's when it hit me. Maybe they never loved me the way I needed. Maybe I was never the son they bragged about. Just the utility, dependable, low maintenance, always good for a check or a favor. And when I stopped performing, the audience left. So I stopped performing for good. There was a moment, one night close to midnight, when I pulled out an old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos from when we were kids. Me and her in the backyard, covered in dirt and popsicle stains. Our dad spraying us with a garden hose while mom laughed behind the lens. A part of me wanted to believe those people still existed. That under all the layers of manipulation and resentment, there had once been something real. But memories are tricky things. They don't always belong to who you are now. I looked at a photo of the two of us, me holding a trophy from science fair, her with a crown for some school play. She was beaming. I was squinting into the sun, and I realized, even then, she was the star. I was the support. That dynamic didn't change, it just grew teeth. I closed the box and put it back. Not because it hurt, because I didn't need it anymore. There's no inheritance coming my way. Not from them. Not from their estate, or their affection, or their approval. And for once, I didn't want it. I didn't need it. Because what I had, what I finally owned, was mine. Not gifted, not conditional, just mine. I spent that weekend repainting the inside of the house. Nothing dramatic, soft whites, muted blues, clean edges. I played music while I worked. Not the kind they liked. My kind. I cooked for myself. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything with it. I even invited a couple of friends over. Not to show off, just to share space that finally felt mine. And late that Sunday night, I sat in the living room, the walls still smelling faintly of fresh paint, and realized something that should have hit me years ago. I don't owe them my silence, and I definitely don't owe them my peace. I started using my full name again. Not the short version my family preferred, not the nickname my sister made up in junior high and weaponized like a charm. My full name, the one on my birth certificate, Jacob. It felt strange at first, too formal, too exposed, but I kept saying it. At work, on deliveries, on the voicemail I'd finally updated. And eventually, it started to fit. It's hard to explain how something so small can feel like a reclamation, but it was. It wasn't about syllables, it was about identity, about ownership. I was no longer answering to a version of myself filtered through someone else's comfort. People noticed. My manager raised an eyebrow when I asked to update my email signature. Friends hesitated for a second before adjusting. One even asked if I'd join a cult. I laughed. No, I said. I just finally stopped apologizing for who I am. There's a strange kind of liberation in that, realizing you can reintroduce yourself to the world without anyone's permission. I kept making changes, quiet ones. I canceled the Christmas flight. Didn't send a single Happy New Year text to the family thread that had gone dormant anyway. When a card came in the mail from my mom, no return address, just love. Always, I read it once and tucked it in a drawer. Not to treasure it, just to remember what boundary looks like. You don't have to burn bridges, I've learned. Sometimes, you just stop walking toward them. My sister's name popped up again a few weeks later, this time in a neighborhood app of all places. She'd applied for a job at a local design co-op. I don't know if they Googled her or saw the video, but the post said applicant withdrawn. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity either. Just a quiet knowing. Actions follow people. Truth finds a way. And me? I kept moving forward. I joined a gym. Not to fix anything, just to move. Bought myself a decent pair of running shoes and started going every morning before work. The first week, my legs burned so bad I had to lean on the banister just to get downstairs. But there was something oddly satisfying about that pain. It reminded me I had control again. Over my body, over my time, over the story I was telling with my life. One morning, standing in front of the mirror in the locker room, sweat still dripping, I caught my own reflection, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't look away. Not because I liked what I saw, but because I respected him. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or final words. It shows up one morning when you're making coffee and realize you haven't checked your phone for drama in days. It's quiet, almost forgettable, like the absence of a headache you didn't know you'd been living with. I started doing things without narrating them to anyone. Took a solo trip to Mendocino, stayed in a rental cabin near the cliffs. I brought books I never read and meals I barely cooked. Most I just walked, watched the water fold and unfold endlessly. I thought about nothing, which felt like a luxury. There was no one to update. No one asking how I was holding up. No one pretending to care, just long enough to twist the story back around to her. And that absence, it wasn't loneliness. It was space. For the first time in years, I had room to breathe without justification. When I came back home, everything felt a little different. The house hadn't changed, but I had. I moved slower, talked less, thought more. I took stock of the people still in my life. Friends who didn't flinch when I needed space. Coworkers who respected silence more than sympathy. I started valuing presence over performance. I finally donated the last box of my parents' stuff they'd left at my place years ago. Old linens, some china, a few picture frames with stock photos still inside. I held on to nothing. Not because it didn't matter, but because I no longer needed objects to remember what had already carved itself into me. Some days, the bitterness tried to creep back in, like a fog that rolls in even when the forecast said clear. I let it come. I didn't fight it. I just watched it pass. That's the thing they never tell you about healing. It's not a line you cross. It's a circle you walk, sometimes twice, sometimes for years. But every time I came back around, it hurt a little less. I wasn't building a new life out of spite. I was building it because no one else was going to. And maybe that was the lesson all along. Not that they failed me, but that I kept waiting for them not to.